The sands of Egypt whisper tales of long-forgotten times when the sun god ruled the sky and kings reigned beside powerful queens. Among the many names buried by the Nile and dusted in gold, one rises again and again, luminous and eternal. Nefertiti. Her name, meaning "the beautiful one has come," still echoes through temples, tombs, and time itself. In the warm stillness of the desert, when the wind sighs low and the stars blink softly above the pyramids, it's not hard to imagine her silhouette. Tall, poised, regal, walking silently beneath palm trees, or standing at the side of her king, gazing toward the horizon where Ra's sunboat dips each evening. Nefertiti was more than a queen. She was a presence, a symbol, a mystery. Her story begins in the late 14th century BCE, during a time when the power of the pharaohs stood unchallenged, and the ancient gods of Egypt ruled the hearts of millions. Yet Nefertiti's rise would not follow tradition. Her life would alter the religious and political course of Egypt forever, and her memory would vanish into silence for centuries, before being reborn in the imagination of the modern world. Historians are still unsure of her true origins. Some believe she was born into nobility, possibly the daughter of a high-ranking official who would later become pharaoh himself. Others suggest she may have had foreign roots, possibly Syrian or Mitanni, which might explain her unique features and exotic beauty. Whatever the truth may be, by the time she stepped onto the stage of history, she was already deeply enmeshed in the royal court and well versed in the sacred rituals and politics of Egypt's elite. Nefertiti became the great royal wife of Pharaoh Akhenaten, a ruler whose reign would be one of the most radical and controversial in Egyptian history. Together they undertook a religious revolution, abandoning the traditional pantheon of gods in favor of a single deity, Aten, the radiant disk of the sun. Temples to Amun, Isis, Osiris, and the rest were closed, their statues defaced, their priests dismissed. In their place rose a new capital city, Akhetaten, or the Horizon of the Aten. Built from scratch in the desert and devoted entirely to the worship of the sun. Nefertiti was not a silent partner in these transformations. Unlike many queens before her, she was depicted in public art not as a passive consort, but as a near equal to the pharaoh. She is shown leading religious ceremonies, striking down enemies and offering gifts to Aten, alongside her husband. In some scenes she even wears the blue war crown usually reserved for male rulers. It was a bold visual statement. Nefertiti was no ordinary queen. She was a sovereign force in her own right. Their rule was marked by both beauty and chaos. Artistic conventions changed dramatically under Akhenaten and Nefertiti. Stiff, idealized portraits gave way to more naturalistic depictions. Elongated heads, soft bellies, expressive eyes. The royal family was shown in intimate scenes, cradling children, kissing, relaxing beneath the sun's rays. It was as if, for a brief moment in time, the pharaoh and his queen had tried to reshape the world in a gentler image. Nefertiti bore 6 daughters, each playing a role in the life of the court. No sons are definitively attributed to her, though speculation has long swirled around the boy king Tutankhamun, who may have been her stepson, or possibly even her own child. What is clear is that Nefertiti held sway not just in private chambers, but in the halls of governance. Some Egyptologists believe she may have ruled as co-regent toward the end of Akhenaten's life. Others go further, suggesting that after Akhenaten's death she may have ruled alone under a new name, Neferneferueten, before disappearing from the historical record altogether. Her vanishing act has long puzzled historians. One theory posits that she died suddenly, perhaps from plague or childbirth, and was hastily buried. Another suggests she was forced into retirement by court factions opposed to her reforms. A third possibility, more romantic, more mysterious, is that she reinvented herself completely, shedding the name Nefertiti like an old skin, becoming a pharaoh in her own right, hidden behind ceremonial names and titles. For centuries her story was lost, her name faded from monuments, her likeness buried beneath shifting sands. Then, in 1912, an astonishing discovery was made in the ruins of Amarna, the capital city she helped build, a German archaeologist unearthed a painted limestone bust of a woman, exquisitely crafted and hauntingly lifelike. Her features, delicate, symmetrical, impossibly serene, stared across millennia with quiet command. The bust of Nefertiti became one of the most iconic symbols of ancient beauty, and with it, her legend was reborn. The bust now resides in the Neues Museum in Berlin. Though Egypt has long sought its return, it remains a point of fascination not only for its craftsmanship but for the emotion it conveys. A stillness, a wisdom, a kind of timeless dignity that seems to resist interpretation. Just as Nefertiti herself resists being fully known. She is part myth, part history, her life braided with speculation and wonder. To this day, archaeologists continue to search for her tomb. Some believe it lies hidden within the walls of Tutankhamun's burial chamber. Others suspect it may be concealed in the rocky hills around Amarna. But even if her resting place is never found, her legacy endures. In the art she inspired, the politics she influenced, the sunlit religion she embraced. In Nefertiti's story is a lullaby from ancient Egypt, a dream song sung by stone and wind. In her world, the Nile shimmered under the golden Aten, lotus flowers floated on still waters, and the queen walked barefoot through alabaster corridors lit by sunlight alone. She ruled with a grace that defied tradition, and in doing so etched her name into eternity. Though time has tried to erase her, the world remembers. In statues, in sand, in stars. Her spirit drifts like incense through the ruins of her empire. So, as you rest now, drifting gently into sleep, imagine her there, far away in the hush of the Egyptian twilight, standing tall beside her king, crowned in blue, her gaze fixed on the setting sun, as it bathes the Nile in gold and whispers the name Nefertiti. In the quiet corners of old Constantinople, where lanterns once flickered on worn stone streets and the scent of incense clung to the breeze drifting from the sea, a young girl named Theodora once walked barefoot beneath the fading stars. The city was alive with clamour and splendour, its domes and markets whispering the secrets of empires, yet few could have imagined that the little girl, watching the world from the shadows of the hippodrome, would one day rise to rule it. Not from the margins, but from a golden throne beside a mighty emperor. Theodora's beginnings were as humble as the dawn. Born around the year 500, perhaps in a modest home near the entertainment quarters of the city, she was the daughter of a bear trainer who worked for the Green faction, a chariot racing team and political power. When her father died, her family fell into hardship. Her mother, in desperation, took her 3 daughters to the hippodrome and begged for help from the Greens. They refused. The Blues, their rival faction, showed mercy, and so Theodora's allegiance was shaped not just by kindness, but by memory. As a teenager, Theodora entered the world of theatre. Not the dignified recitals of courtly drama, but the bold, bawdy performances of the city's popular stage. She was a dancer, an actress, a performer who learned early how to command a crowd with a flick of the wrist, a tilt of the chin. Some accounts, coloured by judgment and centuries of bias, paint her early years in scandal, but beyond the gossip lies a truth more powerful than any fiction. Theodora was sharp, observant, and astonishingly intelligent. She listened as well as she spoke. She watched the movements of men and learned the movements of power. When she was still very young, she left Constantinople and travelled to North Africa, where she spent time in Alexandria and perhaps even deeper into Egypt. What she saw there remains a mystery, but when she returned to the city it was clear she had changed. She had grown not only in years but in depth. She abandoned the stage and embraced a quieter, more introspective life, one shaped by contemplation, perhaps by spiritual longing. Some say she became a wool spinner, living modestly in a small home near the palace. She may have seemed invisible to those who passed her, but fate, as ever, had other plans. It was in this period of quiet that she met Justinian, a rising star in the Byzantine court, nephew of the reigning emperor. Their meeting, though barely documented, must have held extraordinary chemistry. Justinian, known for his vision and ambition, saw something rare in Theodora. She, in turn, understood the corridors of power like few others. They talked, perhaps at length, about the city, the empire, the burden of rule, and the hope for justice. When Justinian decided to marry her, the court was scandalized. But he was undeterred. He convinced his uncle to change the law that forbade nobles from marrying actresses, and so Theodora became not just his wife, but his partner in rule. When Justinian ascended the throne in 527, Theodora was crowned beside him, not behind, not beneath, but beside. She wore the imperial purple with grace and gravity, and from the very beginning she made it clear that she would not be a mere ornament of the court. She advised the emperor, joined in state councils, received ambassadors, and walked the marble halls of the palace with quiet certainty. Her wisdom became most evident during one of the most dangerous moments in Justinian's reign, the Nika riots of 532. Discontent had erupted across the city, with rival factions uniting against the emperor. For days, Constantinople burned. The mob declared a new emperor. Justinian, shaken and unsure, considered fleeing. But Theodora did not flinch. She stood before him and his advisers and uttered words that would be remembered for centuries. Royalty is a fine burial shroud. She would rather die a queen than live in exile, she said. Her resolve steeled Justinian. Together they crushed the rebellion. Thousands perished, but the throne remained intact. Theodora had saved the empire. Beyond crisis, Theodora turned her energy to reform. She championed the rights of women in ways that were revolutionary for the time. She enacted laws to curb human trafficking and protect women from forced prostitution. She improved divorce rights and property protections for wives. She founded institutions, refuges, and homes for women who had been cast aside by society. Her laws did not erase injustice, but they chipped at the foundations of cruelty with persistence and compassion. She also wielded subtle influence in religious matters. While Justinian supported Chalcedonian Christianity, Theodora was sympathetic to the Monophysite minority, a group often persecuted for their beliefs. She provided them with refuge, interceded on their behalf, and made space for a version of faith that otherwise would have been erased from imperial life. Her quiet defiance added a deeper layer to her portrait, a woman of principle, not just politics. Though imperial life was filled with silk robes and golden ceilings, Theodora was never fully free from shadows. Her past haunted her, sometimes wielded as a weapon by enemies who resented her rise, and yet she never allowed shame to define her. Her presence at court was unwavering. She carried herself with the knowledge of where she had come from and the certainty of what she had become. Her partnership with Justinian was more than romantic, it was a true alliance. He respected her judgment, valued her strength, and leaned on her during times of uncertainty. In many ways their reign was one of shared vision, if not always shared acclaim. The empire they shaped together would leave a mark that echoed through centuries. Theodora died in 548, possibly from cancer, after more than 2 decades as empress. Her death shook Justinian deeply. Though he ruled for many more years, the warmth seemed to fade from his gaze. He continued his great projects, building the Hagia Sophia, expanding laws and borders, but something essential had gone quiet in his life. Theodora was buried in the imperial mausoleum, her legacy preserved in mosaics that still glimmer softly in the basilicas of Ravenna. In one she stands robed in imperial purple, her eyes wide and calm, a chalice in her hand, and the shadow of history behind her. Tonight, as your breathing slows and your mind drifts gently into the spaces between waking and dreaming, imagine her there, walking the stone galleries of the great palace. The night breeze from the Bosporus lifting her veil, she gazes from a balcony, not as the woman she was once judged to be, but as the woman she became. The empress who rose from the stage to the throne and ruled not with spectacle, but with strength, wisdom, and unwavering dignity. Let your thoughts settle like the dust of old Constantinople, drifting across marble and gold, resting softly in the memory of Theodora, empress, reformer, survivor, and symbol of quiet resilience. Let your eyes begin to close, and your thoughts drift back through the centuries, back past the age of towering cathedrals and clashing armies, back to the soft hills and quiet vineyards of medieval Aquitaine. There, in the heart of what is now southwestern France, where rivers flow gently between sun-warmed fields and the scent of wild herbs lingers in the air, a young girl named Eleanor was born into one of the most powerful noble houses in Europe. Her world was a patchwork of ancient chateaux, walled cities, and quiet monasteries, and it was also a world of songs, poetry, and the glittering ideals of courtly love. From this peaceful yet politically charged land, Eleanor of Aquitaine would rise to become one of the most extraordinary women in history, Queen of France, Queen of England, and mother to kings. Eleanor was born around 1122, the daughter of William X, Duke of Aquitaine, and Duchess Eleanor de Châtellerault. Her birthright gave her dominion over a vast territory larger than the holdings of the French king himself. A land rich not only in resources, but in culture. Aquitaine was a place where troubadours sang tales of gallant knights and longing maidens, and where noble courts valued eloquence, wit, and education as much as martial strength. Eleanor grew up fluent in Latin, schooled in the art of diplomacy, and raised in the refined traditions of southern French nobility. When her father died in 1137, Eleanor inherited the duchy as a teenager. That same year she was married to Louis VII, heir to the French throne. Within months she was crowned Queen of France. Her life as consort to Louis was filled with ceremony, pilgrimage, and political tension. Though she tried to bring the lively culture of Aquitaine to the more austere French court, she often clashed with Louis's advisors, who found her independence unsettling. Her personality was vivid, spirited, intelligent, sometimes defiant. She refused to be a silent presence at court. She had ideas, opinions, and a will as strong as any sovereign. Eleanor's relationship with Louis was strained from the beginning. Their personalities could not have been more different. He was pious, introverted, and indecisive. She was bold, witty, and used to command. The tensions between them grew more visible during the Second Crusade, which they both joined in 1147. Eleanor accompanied her husband to the Holy Land, an unusual and controversial act for a queen. She led her own contingent of soldiers from Aquitaine and insisted on travelling as a feudal leader in her own right. The journey was long and perilous, and the campaign itself ended in failure, but the crusade showed Europe something remarkable. A queen who rode with knights, who spoke to princes and patriarchs as an equal, and who refused to be silenced by tradition. Rumours swirled of conflicts with Louis, of her influence over military decisions, even of romantic entanglements. Whatever the truth, the couple's marriage never recovered. In 1152, after 15 years and 2 daughters, their union was annulled on the grounds of consanguinity. Eleanor was once again the Duchess of Aquitaine, free, powerful, and unmarried. Her freedom would not last long. Just weeks after the annulment, Eleanor married Henry Plantagenet, the energetic and ambitious Duke of Normandy, who would become King Henry II of England 2 years later. Their marriage was one of strategy as well as passion. Together they ruled an empire stretching from the borders of Scotland to the Pyrenees. Eleanor was now Queen of England, but she was much more than a consort. She was the ruler of her own lands, a cultural patron, and eventually the mother of 10 children, including 2 future kings, Richard the Lionheart and John. The early years of their marriage were dynamic and fruitful. Eleanor maintained her court in Poitiers, where she revived the ideals of chivalry and romantic verse. It was said that she hosted literary contests among troubadours and poets, promoting a code of behaviour that balanced honour, love, and restraint. The courts of love, though possibly legendary, reflected her impact on the culture of medieval Europe. She gave voice to women's experiences and helped shape the ideals of knighthood and noble behaviour that would define the age. But Eleanor's relationship with Henry grew stormy over time. The king was fiery and forceful, often domineering. Though they shared many interests and a powerful alliance, their temperaments collided. Tensions worsened as their sons grew older and the question of inheritance loomed. Eleanor supported her sons when they rebelled against their father in the 1170s, seeking a greater share of power. For this act, Henry imprisoned her. She was kept under close watch for over 15 years, allowed only limited freedom during religious holidays. Even in captivity, Eleanor's legend grew. She remained a figure of fascination and admiration, strong, steadfast, and unapologetically herself. When Henry died in 1189, her son Richard ascended the throne and released her immediately. Far from retiring, Eleanor returned to public life with vigour. She acted as regent while Richard went on crusade, and managed the kingdom with skill and authority. She arranged political marriages, negotiated with enemies, and travelled across Europe in her 70s. A queen in body and spirit. Eleanor outlived nearly all of her children and died in 1204 at the age of around 82, a remarkable lifespan for her time. She spent her final years at the Abbey of Fontevraud, a serene resting place in the heart of the French countryside. She was buried beside Henry and Richard, surrounded by the peace she had so often been denied in life. Eleanor of Aquitaine remains one of the most extraordinary women in all of history. She was not just a queen, but a duchess, a diplomat, a mother, a crusader, and a cultural icon. She bridged the worlds of France and England, of old faith and new ideas, of poetry and politics. Her influence shaped generations of monarchs and moulded the very idea of what a queen could be. She was not content to merely wear a crown. She wielded it. Now, as the night deepens and your thoughts slow like the gentle flow of the Garonne River winding through Aquitaine, imagine her walking through her court at Poitiers, the scent of lavender in the air, the soft lilt of a lute echoing through the stone hall. Picture her speaking to knights and poets, her voice calm and commanding, her eyes reflecting the wisdom of a lifetime spent at the heart of power. She lived through war and peace, through love and loss, through rebellion and redemption. And in the quiet of her abbey, long after the noise of kingdoms had faded, her memory settled like dust on parchment, silent, powerful, enduring. Let her story be your lullaby tonight. Let her journey across empires carry you gently into sleep, where queens ride beside kings, where vineyards shimmer in the dawn, and where Eleanor's spirit still walks, regal and eternal, through the dreams of history. Close your eyes now and drift back through the layers of time, back to the domes and minarets of Istanbul rising like dreams from the shores of the Bosphorus, where the call to prayer echoes softly in the warm evening air, and silks rustle behind the high walls of Topkapi Palace. In this gilded world of mosaics, fountains, and whispered secrets, a young girl once entered through iron gates as a captive, a stranger in a strange land, but through wit, charm, intelligence, and an unshakable will, she would become one of the most powerful women in Ottoman history. She would become Hürrem Sultan, once a slave, later a sultana, and forever a symbol of transformation in the shadowed corridors of empire. She was not born into luxury or title. Her name at birth was likely Alexandra or Anastasia, and she came from the borderlands of Ruthenia, present-day Ukraine, a place of forests and rivers, villages and wooden churches. She may have been the daughter of a priest or a modest household, growing up with songs in a Slavic tongue, and the quiet rhythms of life on the edge of powerful empires. But in her teenage years her world shattered. She was taken during a Tatar raid, stolen from her homeland, and sold into slavery. Torn from her family, from everything familiar, she was shipped across the Black Sea, then led up the Bosphorus to the Ottoman capital. There, behind the walls of Topkapi Palace, her life would begin anew. She entered the harem, the secluded section of the palace reserved for the women of the imperial household. It was a place both gilded and confined, a world of silk and education, yet one marked by rules and competition. Here young women were trained in languages, music, dance, poetry, and the arts of conversation and courtly behaviour. They were educated not only to serve, but, potentially, to rise. The harem was not only a place of beauty and desire, it was a school of politics, ambition and survival. Among hundreds of women, the young Ruthenian stood out. She was quick-witted, radiant, and learned fast. Soon, she attracted the attention of the Sultan himself, Suleiman the Magnificent, ruler of a vast empire stretching from Hungary to Arabia. He was a poet, a strategist, a man of deep introspection, and as fate would have it, he found in her a partner of both heart and mind. He gave her a name, Hürrem, meaning the cheerful one. Their bond deepened quickly, surpassing all norms of the Ottoman court. Against precedent, he freed her from slavery. Then, in a move that shocked the empire, he married her, making her not just his consort, but his legal wife. Hürrem's new role gave her unprecedented influence, and she wielded it with extraordinary skill. She bore Suleiman 6 children, including the future Sultan Selim II. Unlike previous concubines whose children might be sent away from court to govern distant provinces, Hürrem remained by the Sultan's side in Istanbul. She corresponded with world leaders, advised on matters of state, and supported major charitable projects across the empire. Under her patronage, mosques, schools, hospitals, and soup kitchens were built, leaving a legacy that still stands today. She was not only a mother and advisor, but a player in the imperial game. The Ottoman succession was not determined by primogeniture. Instead, it was a ruthless contest among the Sultan's sons, often ending in fratricide. Knowing this, Hürrem acted to secure the future of her own children. She navigated complex alliances, court rivalries, and the suspicions of powerful viziers. Her most formidable rival was Mahidevran, another concubine and the mother of Suleiman's eldest son, Mustafa. For years, tensions simmered between them, and in time it boiled into open political warfare. Hürrem was often blamed for the eventual downfall of Mustafa, who was accused of plotting rebellion and executed on Suleiman's orders. Historians still debate her role in this dark episode, but what remains clear is that she survived every storm. She retained the Sultan's affection and trust until the end. In a world where concubines were often discarded once their beauty faded, Hürrem remained his chosen companion for life. Their love was chronicled in Suleiman's poetry, where he called her his spring, his joy, his love of loves. Their relationship was not just romantic, it was deeply intellectual. They exchanged letters when apart, written in elegant Ottoman Turkish, Persian and Arabic. In these messages, Suleiman shared the burdens of war, the loneliness of campaigns, and his longing for her. Hürrem in return sent comfort, advice, and tokens of devotion. She was not only the Sultan's wife, but his confidant, a constant presence in the heart of the empire. In 1558, after decades at the centre of power, Hürrem died in Istanbul. She was buried near Suleiman in the Süleymaniye Mosque complex, her tomb crowned with tiles of blue and gold, her name etched into the city she helped shape. Even after her death, her influence lingered. Her son, Selim II, took the throne, and future sultanas would follow her path, from secluded women behind lattice screens to political actors on the imperial stage. Her rise ushered in what historians call the Sultanate of Women, an era during which mothers, wives, and daughters of sultans wielded significant political power. Today, her story is still told across continents, in Turkish dramas, Ukrainian ballads, and historical texts. She remains a symbol of resilience, intelligence, and transformation. From a girl sold in chains to a queen commanding palaces, from a foreigner in a strange land to the mother of emperors, Hürrem Sultan lived a life that defied the limits of her birth. She did not merely survive her fate, she reshaped it entirely. And now, as your thoughts drift through the domed courtyards and candle-lit halls of old Istanbul, you may imagine her walking softly beneath a marble archway, her robes trailing behind her, her eyes calm and clear. Hear the echo of fountains, the hush of voices in a foreign tongue, the scent of jasmine and rosewater in the air. She speaks not with force but with grace, her power drawn from presence, from wit, from wisdom learned in hardship. Let her story carry you gently into the night, where dreams slip through silk curtains and stars reflect in still waters. Let the past soften and melt into the shadows, and let Hürrem's journey, so unlikely, so enduring, be your lullaby. For even in the silence of sleep her voice remains, steady and serene, whispering through the pages of history. Let your eyes grow heavy now, and let your thoughts settle like falling leaves in an old European garden. The air is soft, cool with the scent of lavender and crushed herbs, and somewhere the quiet echo of footsteps passes through long stone corridors. You are in France, in the 16th century, in a world of shadow and splendour, velvet and steel, where intrigue moves as silently as moonlight through the royal halls. In this world, a woman once ruled not from a throne of power, but from the shadows behind it. She was Catherine de Medici, queen, mother, widow, and regent, remembered by many as a dark queen, yet shaped more by survival than malice. Her story, like the flicker of a candle in a storm, glows softly now through the passage of time. Catherine was born in Florence in 1519, a member of the powerful Medici family, bankers, patrons of art, and rulers of Tuscany, but her early life was far from secure. Her parents died when she was just a baby, and she was passed between relatives, educated in convents, and often at the mercy of political tides. Despite the wealth of her name, she was seen as a lesser Medici, not destined for greatness. And yet, fate had other plans for her. In 1533, when she was only 14, Catherine was married off to the son of King Francis I of France, the young Prince Henry, who would later become King Henry II. She was small, with dark eyes and a quiet demeanour, and when she arrived at the French court she was met with suspicion. She was Italian, foreign, and seen as lacking beauty or influence. Even her husband showed her little affection. He preferred his mistress, the glamorous and commanding Diane de Poitiers, who held his attention well into his reign. Catherine for years remained on the sidelines, quietly observing, listening, and learning. She struggled for over a decade to bear children, a dangerous position for a queen, but eventually she gave birth to 10, 7 of whom survived infancy. These children would become her anchors, her responsibilities, and her most powerful cards in the great game of monarchy. When her husband died suddenly in a jousting accident in 1559, Catherine's life changed forever. She was no longer just the queen consort. She became queen mother, and soon regent for her young sons. And so began her long and turbulent reign. The France she ruled was one torn by religious strife. Protestants, known as Huguenots, were rising in number and influence, while Catholics, the traditional power holders, felt threatened. The country was on the edge of civil war, and Catherine, now regent to her young son Charles IX, had to navigate this treacherous divide. She tried at first to be moderate, to keep balance, to offer tolerance, but peace was fragile, and power was always slipping from one hand to another. Catherine became known for her courtly pageants, elaborate entertainments, and intellectual salons. She brought with her a love for astrology, fine cuisine, and art from Italy, and she helped transform the French court into a centre of culture. She commissioned the building of beautiful palaces, introduced the fork to French dining, and brought Italian elegance into French fashion and architecture. But beneath the silk and spectacle the country was bleeding. Catherine was forced to make choices no mother should ever face. Her sons, Francis II, Charles IX, and later Henry III, were each weak in their own way, unprepared for kingship, too young, too sickly, or too easily manipulated. And so she ruled in their names, often making the real decisions while they wore the crown. She became a master of diplomacy, writing letters to ambassadors, brokering marriages, and attempting to hold together a kingdom on the verge of collapse. It was in this atmosphere of fear and suspicion that the most infamous episode of her reign occurred: the St. Bartholomew's Day massacre. In 1572, as Protestants gathered in Paris to celebrate the wedding of Catherine's daughter Margaret to the Protestant leader Henry of Navarre, a sudden outbreak of violence shattered the celebrations. Catholic mobs, likely encouraged by hardline factions in the court, turned on the Protestant guests, and a wave of killings spread across the city and then through the countryside. Thousands died in what became one of the bloodiest events in French history. Historians still debate Catherine's role. Did she order the massacre? Did she merely allow it to happen in a moment of fear after an attempted assassination of one of the Protestant leaders? Or was she, like so many others, swept up in the brutal logic of power and survival? Whatever the truth, her reputation darkened forever. In pamphlets and stories that followed, she was cast as a poisoner, a witch, a schemer, the dark queen behind the throne. Yet the Catherine who emerges from her letters, her actions, and her lifelong dedication to her children was more complex than these portraits suggest. She was not cruel for its own sake. She was a woman who endured decades of insecurity, a foreign queen who never felt fully accepted, a mother who watched her sons struggle and fail in a violent world. Her power was born not from conquest, but from necessity. In her later years, Catherine watched as her sons continued to die, one after another. Francis died young, Charles died haunted and ill, and Henry, her last son, reigned in isolation. France remained divided, fragile. Catherine spent her final years still writing, still negotiating, still trying to bring peace between Protestants and Catholics, even as she grew tired and sick. She died in 1589 at the age of 69, just months before the death of her last son and the end of the Valois dynasty. Catherine de' Medici's legacy is tangled in myth and reality, in fear and admiration. She has been called the serpent in the garden of France, the architect of murder, the hidden hand behind the throne, but she was also a builder of palaces, a patron of the arts, a protector of her family, and one of the most powerful women ever to hold influence over a European kingdom. She ruled not from glory, but from necessity, not with sword and armour, but with silence, letters, and decisions made in candle-lit rooms. And so, as you drift now through the echoing chambers of memory, you might picture her standing in her library, surrounded by books and tapestries, the scent of parchment and ink in the air. Her face is calm, unreadable. She turns a page and makes a note. She listens at council meetings and watches as others speak. Her power is in her patience. Her strength is in her silence. She is not the heroine of ballads, nor the villain of fairy tales. She is something far more human, a woman who did what she had to, in a world that left her little choice. Let her story quiet your thoughts now. Let her world of candlelight and stone walls settle gently around you. The past does not speak in shouts. It murmurs like wind through old corridors. It soothes like the turning of a page. And Catherine, in her way, will stand watch as you sleep, regal and resolute, fading into the calm of history. Let your thoughts grow quiet now, like snowfall in an old courtyard, where every flake finds its place in silence. Let the steady rhythm of history soothe your breath, and the echo of long-forgotten voices gently fill your mind. We journey now to the heart of old Europe, to the grand and distant palaces of Vienna, where marble floors stretch beneath gilded ceilings, and the hush of diplomacy whispers through heavy velvet drapes. It is the 18th century, and the Habsburg Empire, with all its glory and tension, towers across Central Europe like a sleeping lion. And at the centre of this empire there is a woman, strong, regal, unshakable. Her name is Maria Theresa, and she was not just a queen, but a warrior, a reformer, a mother of 16, and the last of her kind. Her reign would reshape Europe and echo through the halls of time like the soft tolling of a church bell at dusk. Maria Theresa was born in 1717, the beloved daughter of Charles VI's Holy Roman Emperor. Though her father had no sons, he saw in her the future of the Habsburg dynasty. Yet Europe had never seen a female ruler of the Habsburg realms, and many doubted it ever would. Her father's pragmatic sanction, a decree issued to ensure his daughter could inherit his lands, was signed by many of the great powers, but promises in politics are often fragile. When Charles died in 1740, Maria Theresa was only 23. She found herself not just a grieving daughter, but the sudden empress of a fragile, sprawling, and contested empire. She took to the role with a quiet but powerful determination. She had been raised to rule, schooled in languages, statecraft, and diplomacy, though many at court still questioned her ability. Yet she proved them wrong, not with loud proclamations, but with steadfast decisions and the grace of a ruler born. Her husband, Francis Stephen, whom she loved dearly, became her co-ruler in name, but it was Maria Theresa who carried the true weight of the crown. She stood alone against enemies, doubt, and the pressures of war. Almost immediately her right to rule was challenged. The War of the Austrian Succession erupted when Frederick II of Prussia, later known as Frederick the Great, invaded Silesia, a wealthy province of her empire. Other European powers saw her as weak and vulnerable, and alliances shifted like tides. France, Bavaria, Saxony, and Spain all threatened her sovereignty. But Maria Theresa did not break. Instead, she rode through the Austrian lands, rallying troops and nobility, calling upon the loyalty of her people with words both heartfelt and firm. She did not appear as a warrior in armour, but as a queen draped in the dignity of duty, appealing to the shared identity of her people. And they followed her. Her bravery during these years became legend. Though she eventually lost Silesia to Prussia, she held the empire together, preserving its core and proving herself more than worthy of the throne. Her determination in the face of war and betrayal earned her the respect of allies and enemies alike. But Maria Theresa's legacy was not carved by war alone. It was shaped by her deep commitment to reform, order, and the welfare of her subjects. She governed with discipline and vision, transforming the Habsburg bureaucracy, improving the tax system, and centralizing authority to better manage her many lands. She reformed the army, increased state revenues, and made education a priority, even making elementary school compulsory. An extraordinary decision for the time. She believed that a strong empire required educated citizens, and that duty to the state was a shared responsibility. In matters of religion, she remained a devout Catholic, often conservative and rigid in her beliefs. Yet her reign was marked more by law and order than fanaticism. She cared deeply for her subjects, even if her rule was firm. She opened hospitals, regulated commerce, and ensured grain stores were kept for times of famine. She fought against corruption in the courts and was known to dress simply, preferring the warmth of her family to the glitter of court life. Her palace, Schönbrunn, grew into a symbol of elegance and strength, but it was also a home, filled with the noise and joy of children. She bore 16 in total, 13 of whom survived to adulthood. Among them was Marie Antoinette, who would later become Queen of France and meet a tragic end. But to Maria Theresa, they were all her children, and she took part in their upbringing with both tenderness and control. She arranged marriages for them across Europe, binding Austria to other royal houses through ties of blood and alliance. These unions were not only political, they were strategic, carefully planned to stabilize the empire. Yet Maria Theresa was no cold architect of dynasties. She grieved deeply when she lost her children, and letters between her and her daughters reveal a woman full of maternal love, concern, and at times heartbreak. Her relationship with her husband, Francis Stephen, was one of rare devotion in the world of arranged royal marriages. She adored him and leaned on him in moments of doubt. His death in 1765 shook her to her core. She wore black for the rest of her life, rarely appeared in public without mourning dress, and retreated from the pleasures of court. Yet she continued to rule with diligence, mentoring her son Joseph II, who would eventually take her place. She often clashed with Joseph, whose Enlightenment ideals ran headlong into her more traditional views. He sought to secularize institutions, reduce the power of the Church, and implement reforms at a rapid pace. She, though practical, was cautious. Their debates became a hallmark of her later reign, and though they disagreed, there was respect between them. She understood that time was moving forward, and she tried, in her own way, to guide the empire through that change without abandoning its soul. Maria Theresa died in 1780, after 4 decades on the throne. Her death marked the end of the House of Habsburg as a ruling line in its original form. Yet the empire she left behind was more unified, more modern and more resilient than the one she inherited. She had not only survived in a world that doubted her, but she had ruled it, shaped it, and left her mark on its every corner. Her image in portraits shows a woman of seriousness and substance, her gaze unwavering, her shoulders square. But behind that image was a mother who tucked her children into bed, a widow who mourned in silence, a monarch who bore the burdens of empire with patience and grace. She was a woman of contrasts, gentle yet unyielding, devout yet pragmatic, traditional yet forward-looking. The world remembered her as a warrior queen, but she might have preferred to be remembered simply as a good ruler and a mother who tried. And so, as your breath softens and the world around you fades into stillness, imagine her now, walking slowly through the gardens of Schönbrunn, hands folded, eyes lifted to the twilight sky. The trees sway gently in the breeze, and the light falls golden on the palace stones. She does not speak. She does not need to. Her presence remains, quiet and enduring, like the empire she once held in her care. The wind whispers through history, and Maria Theresa continues to walk its path, unafraid and eternal. Let yourself sink deeper now, into quiet thoughts and velvet shadows, where time slows like a river winding through ancient landscapes. The world softens around you, and you find yourself drawn back, far back, across oceans and centuries, to the sweeping courtyards and lacquered halls of imperial China. Lanterns glow softly beneath the dark eaves of the Forbidden City, casting flickers of light across red walls and jade pathways. Here, in the hush of an empire, there was once a woman who rose from the lowest ranks of the court to become the most powerful figure in the land. Her name was Cixi, and though many remember her as a shadowy presence behind the dragon throne, her story is one of resilience, calculation, and the quiet, enduring strength of a woman who would not be dismissed. Born in 1835 into a relatively modest Manchu family, Cixi was named Yehenara. In her early years, nothing suggested she would one day rule an empire. Her family was noble but not wealthy, and she was raised with a mixture of Confucian discipline and the softer teachings of poetry, music, and literature. At 16, she was selected to become a concubine in the court of the Xianfeng Emperor, a position that placed her in the imperial harem but not at its center. It was a world of silks and silence, of unseen rivalries and whispered ambition. Within those palace walls, women were sorted and ranked, their futures tied to the favor of one man. But Cixi was observant, patient, and sharp. She listened more than she spoke, and when the moment came, she seized it. In 1856, she gave birth to the emperor's only son, a boy named Zaichun. With that birth, her position changed instantly. She became not just a consort, but the mother of the heir. In the imperial court, this title carried immense weight. Still, Cixi's power was not guaranteed. The palace was filled with factions and tradition, but she had found her path, and she would follow it with quiet determination. When the Xianfeng emperor died in 1861, his 5-year-old son became the new ruler, the Tongzhou emperor. A regency was formed to govern in his name, and Cixi, as his mother, was expected to retreat behind screens and etiquette. But she refused to be sidelined. Along with another influential woman, the Empress Dowager Xian, she orchestrated a coup of extraordinary subtlety. With the help of loyal officials, they overthrew the regents in what became known as the Xinyo coup. The young emperor remained on the throne, but the real power shifted. Cixi was now co-regent, one of 2 women ruling behind the Yellow Curtain. Her style of governance was deliberate and deeply rooted in traditional values. She did not seek to break the mold of Confucian patriarchy, but rather to master it. She understood the importance of image and used the established rituals and symbols of authority to her advantage. She held court behind a silk screen, speaking through ministers never seen directly by outsiders. Yet every major decision passed through her hands. She was not the emperor, but she guided him. She did not wear the dragon robe, but she held its weight. When her son died in 1875 without an heir, Cixi faced another turning point. Instead of allowing the court to choose the next ruler, she selected her young nephew Guangxu, ensuring that the throne remained within her influence. Once again she served as regent, ruling in his name. Though she eventually allowed him to take the reins of power, their visions for China would soon diverge. The late 19th century was a time of great upheaval for China. Western powers were encroaching, demanding trade, territory and influence. The Opium Wars had already weakened Qing authority, and rebellion simmered across the provinces. Cixi, conservative by nature, was cautious of reform. She supported some modernization, especially when it came to military technology and industry, but resisted dramatic shifts in government and social structure. Her critics accused her of clinging to the past, but her supporters believed she was preserving stability in an increasingly volatile world. The most dramatic rift came during the 100 Days Reform in 1898. Emperor Guangxu, influenced by reformist scholars, sought to rapidly modernize the Chinese government, education system and economy, but the pace was too swift, and the threats to traditional power too stark. Cixi staged another palace coup, placing the emperor under house arrest and reversing many of his policies. She took control once more, not out of malice perhaps, but out of a belief that China's soul was not yet ready for such transformation. It was during this later period of rule that she became most controversial. She was blamed, sometimes unfairly, for the corruption of the Qing bureaucracy, for suppressing reform, and for her role during the Boxer Rebellion, a violent uprising against foreign influence that brought immense suffering to China. While she initially supported the Boxers, she later saw the danger and attempted to negotiate peace. By then it was too late. Western armies entered Beijing and the empire was humiliated once more. But even in the wake of disaster, Cixi showed resilience. In the final years of her life, she permitted a number of reforms, including changes in education, governance, and the military. Some historians see this as a late realization of the need for change, while others view it as a pragmatic shift in response to external pressure. Either way, she remained the central figure in Chinese politics until her death in 1908. She passed quietly, having ruled in one form or another for nearly 5 decades. The day after her death, her chosen successor, the child Puyi, ascended the throne, the last emperor of China. Within 4 years, the Qing dynasty collapsed, and imperial China came to an end. But Cixi's legacy endured, complex and layered, like the silken robes she once wore. To some, she was a ruthless manipulator who held back progress for the sake of power. To others, she was a brilliant survivor in a treacherous world, a woman who held a crumbling empire together long after its foundations had begun to rot. She was not perfect, no ruler is, but she was remarkable. She carved power from a world that offered women little and reigned longer than most men ever could. And so, as the moon rises over the ancient palace walls and the stones grow cool beneath its glow, imagine her there, seated behind a golden screen, her voice low but unwavering, her gaze calm. She watches the world unfold like a scroll in her hands, fragile, beautiful, and endlessly complex. The silk rustles gently in the night air, and the soft click of a hairpin echoes in the stillness. She remains, not just as a shadow of the past, but as a presence that shaped the course of a vast and ancient land. Let her story drift through your thoughts now, like incense winding through a quiet temple. The wind moves softly across the forbidden city, and the world turns on in silence, as the Empress sleeps beneath the stars. Close your eyes, and let the world fall away. In the stillness of night, let your thoughts drift across oceans and time, back to a century where gas lamps flickered softly in the fog. where horses' hooves echoed along cobblestone streets, and steam trains carved new paths through green hills and deep valleys. In the heart of this sprawling, changing world sat a woman on a throne, small in stature, but immense in influence. Her name was Victoria, and though she began her reign as a teenage girl with uncertain eyes, she would become not just a queen, but the soul of an empire. Hers was a life shaped by duty, deep love, staggering loss, and a reign that stretched across decades and continents. Let her story unfold now, slowly, like a painting revealed in candlelight. Victoria was born on a quiet spring day in 1819 in Kensington Palace, London. Her full name, Alexandrina Victoria, reflected the complicated royal ties that bound Europe's monarchies together. She was the daughter of Prince Edward, Duke of Kent, and Princess Victoria of Saxe-Coburg-Saalfeld. Her father died when she was still an infant, and her childhood was shaped by a strict upbringing imposed by her mother and the controlling advisor Sir John Conroy. Isolated and closely watched, young Victoria had few playmates and little freedom, but within her small, confined world she read, wrote, and watched everything. Her mind grew sharp, her will stronger still. When her uncle King William IV died in 1837, she became queen at just 18 years old. Peaty and barely out of girlhood, she was suddenly at the helm of the British Empire. Parliament bowed to her. Foreign ministers sought her approval. A world of immense responsibility opened before her. But Victoria did not shrink from it. On the morning of her accession, she famously declared, "I will be good," and with those 4 simple words, she began a reign that would last longer than any monarch before her. In her early years as queen, she leaned heavily on the guidance of her trusted advisor and prime minister, Lord Melbourne, but it was in 1840, with her marriage to Prince Albert of Saxe-Coburg and Gotha, that her life and reign truly found its rhythm. Their bond was not merely political, it was a deep, passionate love, rare among royal marriages. Albert, intelligent and idealistic, became her partner in every sense. He helped shape her views, modernize the monarchy, and encourage reforms in education, science, and the arts. Together they presented an image of family life that would become the model of Victorian domesticity, disciplined, dignified, and devoted. Victoria and Albert had 9 children together. Their household was busy, structured, and filled with the laughter of princes and princesses. Yet even amidst motherhood and monarchy, Victoria remained steadfast in her authority. Though she adored Albert, she never surrendered her crown. She signed legislation, met ministers, and navigated the complex dance of diplomacy, but always, Albert was her anchor. Then, in 1861, tragedy struck. Albert died suddenly of typhoid fever at the age of 42. Victoria was devastated beyond words. The brightness seemed to vanish from her world. She retreated from public life, wore mourning black for the rest of her days, and immersed herself in his memory. Her withdrawal sparked criticism. Many accused her of neglecting her duties. But for Victoria, the loss was not just of a husband, it was the severing of her soul's twin. She mourned deeply. Yet in time, she continued her reign with renewed clarity. The British Empire, during her years on the throne, expanded to span nearly a quarter of the globe. From India to Africa, Canada to Australia, Victoria became the symbolic mother of nations. Her face adorned coins and postage stamps. Her name graced cities, rivers, and even eras. The Victorian age was one of immense change, industrialization, scientific discovery, and sweeping reform. And at its center sat the Queen, a steady figure amid the storms of progress. Though often viewed as conservative, Victoria was more complex than that label suggests. She supported certain reforms that improved the lives of her people, and was deeply interested in the arts and education. She corresponded with leaders and poets, including Florence Nightingale and Alfred Lord Tennyson. She wrote thousands of letters and kept detailed diaries. In private, she could be emotional and opinionated. In public, she maintained the gravitas expected of a sovereign. Her ability to balance vulnerability with authority endeared her to her subjects over time. In her later years, Victoria grew into a grandmotherly figure, beloved across generations and empires. She celebrated jubilees with grand parades marked by cheers and adoration, and even as she aged, she remained involved in politics, offering counsel to prime ministers and hosting foreign dignitaries. She met with leaders like Benjamin Disraeli and William Gladstone, forming unique and sometimes testy relationships with each. They were her ministers, but she never let them forget who wore the crown. Perhaps what made Victoria so enduring was not just her longevity, but her humanity. She loved, she grieved, she changed, and she endured. Her life was marked by profound emotion, but also by an unshakable sense of responsibility. She saw the world change around her, watched trains replace carriages, electricity banish candlelight, and empires rise and tremble. Yet she held firm, a living link between the past and the future. In 1901, after 63 years on the throne, Queen Victoria died at the age of 81. Her death marked the end of an era. The world she left behind was vastly different from the one she had entered. The empire would begin to wane, and the 20th century would bring conflicts she could never have imagined. But her legacy of strength, duty and quiet resilience remained. As you lie back now, let your thoughts float like the mist over a quiet English garden, where roses bloom in the morning light and carriages roll gently down gravel paths. Picture the Queen in her later years, seated by a window in Windsor Castle, the soft tapping of a fountain in the courtyard beyond. Her hands rest on her lap, her eyes thoughtful. She is surrounded by the photographs of her children, her letters and her memories. The sound of a clock ticks softly in the background. Time passes as it always does, but for a moment all is still. All is calm. In her life, Queen Victoria was a daughter, a wife, a mother, a widow, and above all, a sovereign. She loved deeply, ruled fiercely, and left behind a world forever changed. Let her story lull you now, like the chime of a distant bell across the Thames, as dreams descend like evening fog, and in the quiet hush of history's breath may you rest, knowing that even the weight of an empire can rest lightly on a soul shaped by love. Let the stillness of the night guide your thoughts away from the present. Close your eyes and let the world around you fade into softness, as your mind begins to drift through time and space, far from the buzzing modern world, deep into the heart of the vast Eurasian steppe. The winds blow gently over the rolling grasslands, stirring the tall blades like waves on an endless sea. Here, in the land of yurts and galloping horses, where the sun rises over an open horizon and vanishes behind distant mountains, lived a woman whose quiet strength shaped empires. Her name was Sorghaghtani Beki, a name not etched loudly in modern memory, but one whispered through the generations of rulers she raised, the lands she touched, and the legacy she left behind. Tonight we visit her story, a tale wrapped in silk and horsehair, in loyalty and wisdom, in the ancient rhythm of the Mongol heartlands. Sorghaghtani was born around the year 1190, during the turbulent rise of Genghis Khan, in a time when the Mongol tribes were uniting under one banner. She belonged to the Karaite tribe, one of the influential Mongol clans, and was the niece of a Nestorian Christian leader named Toghrul, who played a crucial role in Mongol politics before his fall. Her early life would have been spent in the mobility of nomadic life, growing up among tents, herds, and the constant movement across the steppe. Her people were fierce and resourceful, and in their way of life, leadership was not just the realm of men. Women, too, managed households, wealth, and in times of need took charge. Sorghaghtani's marriage to Tolui, the youngest son of Genghis Khan, brought her directly into the heart of the Mongol royal family. Tolui was a formidable warrior, brave and respected, yet his youth and position meant that his path to power was uncertain. Together they built a family, one that would become foundational to the future of the Mongol Empire. Sorghaghtani and Tolui had 4 sons, Monke, Kublai, Hulagu, and Arik Boke. Each of them would go on to shape the fate of the empire in profound ways. But their future greatness was not the result of birthright alone. It was their mother's wisdom, her careful guidance and political brilliance that moulded them. When Tolui died in 1232, Sorghaghtani did not retreat into obscurity or mourning. Instead, she stepped forward as the guardian of her children's destinies. In a world dominated by military conquests and fierce rivalries, she held her own, navigating treacherous politics with extraordinary finesse. Though she could not claim a throne for herself, she wielded power through diplomacy, alliances, and patient strategy. She kept her sons educated, trained in leadership, and prepared for the responsibilities ahead. Unlike many of the women around her, she remained independent, refusing remarriage in order to focus on raising her sons and preserving their inheritance. One of Sorghaghtani's most striking characteristics was her ability to balance cultural flexibility with political acumen. A Christian in a largely shamanistic or Buddhist empire, she remained respectful of all faiths and fostered a spirit of tolerance in her children. Her household welcomed thinkers of various backgrounds: Muslim scholars, Christian priests, and Confucian advisors, each offering perspectives that would later shape Mongol governance. She ensured her sons were not just warriors, but also statesmen, capable of ruling vast and diverse territories with insight and fairness. As her sons matured, Sorghaghtani's influence became increasingly visible. When Genghis Khan's successor, Ogedai, died in 1241, a power vacuum threatened to tear the empire apart. Many factions emerged, vying for control, and the succession was far from guaranteed. Sorghaghtani did not panic. She waited, watched, and forged key alliances behind the scenes. She built support among Mongol nobles and leveraged her relationships with powerful Khans. By the time the Kurultai, or Mongol Council, was called to choose the next great Khan, she had marshaled enough strength to secure the position for her eldest son, Möngke. In 1251, Möngke was declared Great Khan, the highest ruler of the entire Mongol Empire. This moment marked the culmination of Sorghaghtani's years of quiet, deliberate labor. Her son now ruled over the largest contiguous empire in world history, stretching from the Pacific Ocean to the heart of Europe. But even as Möngke ascended, her work was not done. She continued to guide her other sons. Hulagu was sent westward, where he established the Ilkhanate in Persia, building cities and leading campaigns that would redefine the Islamic world. Kublai, brilliant and curious, moved into China, where he would later become the founder of the Yuan dynasty and an emperor of vast renown. Alik Boki, the youngest, stayed closer to the Mongol heartlands, where his own fate would become tangled in internal struggles. But whatever their paths, they all carried the lessons and values Sorghaghtani had instilled in them. She taught them unity, adaptability, and respect for other cultures. Under their rule, the Mongol Empire did not merely conquer, it governed. Cities flourished, trade routes reopened, and knowledge travelled further than it ever had before. The Silk Road became a lifeline of civilization, connecting east and west, and at the centre of this remarkable transformation was a mother whose wisdom echoed in every command her sons gave. Despite her monumental achievements, Sorghaghtani remained modest. She sought no grand titles, no monuments, no poems sung in her name, yet even foreign observers noted her brilliance. A Persian historian once remarked that no woman of her time matched her intelligence and strength. She never led an army into battle, yet she won wars of strategy. She never ruled from a throne, yet she governed through influence that reached across continents. She passed away around 1252, not long after seeing Möngke rise as Great Khan. Her death marked the end of a chapter in Mongol history, but her legacy continued through the reigns of her sons and the shape of the world they moulded. The Mongol Empire would eventually fragment, as all empires do, but the foundations laid by Sorghaghtani of tolerance, structure, and wise governance would linger long after. Now, as you sink deeper into rest, picture her in the golden twilight of the steppe, seated outside her grand yurt, the fabric flapping gently in the wind. Her face is calm, her eyes far-seeing, watching her sons ride across the plains, their banners fluttering high. A fire crackles softly nearby, the smoke rising into the cool sky. Her hands rest on her lap, and a quiet satisfaction fills the air. Her world is one of silence and vastness, of memory and destiny. She was a queen in everything but name, a sovereign of spirit, a mother of emperors, and a master of the long game. Let her story soothe you now, a tale of quiet strength in a loud, warlike world. Let the sound of horses' hooves fade into the distance, and let sleep carry you like the wind across the steppe, where legacies are built not with swords alone, but with wisdom, patience, and love. In the hush of night, let your mind drift gently across the decades, back to a time when the world was on the brink of great upheaval. The 1930s were years marked by uncertainty, economic hardship, political unrest, and the ominous rise of conflicts that would soon engulf the globe. Amidst this turbulent backdrop, a quiet yet seismic event unfolded in the British monarchy, one that would change it forever. This is the story of Wallis Simpson, the American woman whose love and determination reshaped a kingdom. Wallis was born Bessie Wallace Warfield on June 19, 1896 in Baltimore, Maryland. From the beginning, her life was anything but ordinary. Raised in a privileged yet troubled household, Wallis developed an early awareness of the world's complexities and contradictions. She married twice before her name became forever linked to the British Crown, first to U.S. Navy officer Earl Winfield Spencer Jr., and then to Ernest Simpson, a British-American businessman. Through these marriages, Wallis became familiar with high society, but her heart and spirit always seemed to reach for something more. The world she entered was still steeped in tradition and rigid social rules, yet beneath the surface, change was stirring. Wallis was independent, stylish, and possessed a charm that captivated those around her, but it was her meeting with Edward, the Prince of Wales, that would forever alter the course of history. Edward, later King Edward VIII, was known for his charisma and popularity, a prince who often seemed at odds with the formal demands of royalty. When Wallis and Edward met in the early 1930s, their connection was immediate and intense. They shared a worldliness and a desire to live beyond the constraints imposed on them. For Edward, Wallis was a breath of fresh air, a partner who understood his restless spirit. However, their love was fraught with challenges. Wallis was twice divorced, a fact that scandalized the British establishment and the Church of England, of which the monarch was the supreme governor. Marrying her would have been unthinkable to many at the time, threatening not only Edward's position but the very stability of the monarchy. Yet Edward was determined. He chose love over crown, a choice that would echo through history. In January 1936, King George V died, and Edward ascended to the throne as King Edward. His reign was brief, but marked by a growing tension between his duties as monarch and his devotion to Wallis. As their relationship deepened, it became clear that Edward intended to marry Wallis, despite the opposition from the government, the church, and his family. The crisis reached its peak in December 1936, when Edward announced his decision to abdicate the throne so he could marry Wallis. This unprecedented act shook the British Empire. The young king's abdication letter spoke of his love for Wallis Simpson and his belief that he could not fulfill his duties without her by his side. His brother Albert took the throne as King George VI, ushering in a new chapter for the monarchy. Wallis and Edward married in June 1937, beginning a life together marked by exile from the royal family and the official duties of monarchy. They lived primarily in France and the United States, becoming a subject of fascination and controversy. Wallis was never formally given the title of Queen, but she remained a central figure in Edward's life until his death in 1972. Despite the scandal, Wallis Simpson's story is not one merely of controversy, but of resilience and determination. She navigated a world that sought to define and confine her, yet she remained true to her desires and her love. Through her, the British monarchy faced a moment of profound change, an event that forced it to reconsider its relationship to personal choice, duty, and the evolving modern world. As you lay back now, imagine the quiet elegance of a garden in exile, where two figures walk slowly beneath a silver moon. The night air is cool, the distant sound of waves gently lapping against the shore. Wallis, poised and graceful, looks ahead with quiet strength, a woman who changed history, not with armies or crowns, but with the power of the heart. Let this story cradle you as sleep draws near. Let the complexities of love and duty, of choice and consequence, wash over you like a gentle tide, and in the stillness of the night, may you find peace in the knowledge that even the greatest of changes can come from the simplest of human truths.